Okay.
All right, this is an interview with George Bottoms, the Microtel Inn, Wellsville, New York. It is the 6th of May, 2003, approximately 9 a.m. The interviewers are Mike Russert and Wayne Clark. Could you tell me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
George Daniel Bottoms. I was born February 18, 1918. Present live in 2810 State Route 244, Belmont, New York.
Okay, where were you born?
Battle Creek, Michigan.
Okay. What was your educational background prior to going into service?
I completed high school at the W.K. Kellogg Consolidated Agricultural High School in Augusta, Michigan. That was in 1936. That fall I entered Michigan State College, completed 4 years of bachelor science degree in landscape architecture, majoring in park administration.
Where were you, and what was your reaction when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Oh, I can't remember where I was, but of course I was quite, oh, yes I do, yes I do. I had been drafted into the Army, and I was at Fort Custer, Michigan at the time.
Okay, so you were in the service prior to...
That's correct, yeah. Yeah, I went to, this was on a Sunday, I went to a movie on the Post and came back to the barracks about 9 o'clock, and everybody was in an uproar about the attack on Pearl Harbor. So I was a buck private at the time.
Do you remember what your initial reaction was at all?
No, I figured it's just some big event. That's all. I wasn't concerned or worried.
Okay. Could you tell us about your service then, from the time you were inducted until service?
I was inducted in let's see, in November of 1941, because then that, of course, that put me in Fort Custer in December, and this was a repel depot, or replacement depot, or whatever you call it. And of course we were tested there to see what branch of the service we should go in. And it was finally decided that I should go to the Air Corps. And so they sent me down to St. Louis. I forget the name of the Jefferson Barracks. They sent me to Jefferson Barracks. And there, of course, they gave you a further test. I applied for the pilot training, but I had 130, I think, in one eye, so they wouldn't take me for a pilot. They had to have 20/20. And so I have to correct myself. It wasn't 130, it was 230 in one eye and 20/20 in the other eye. Anyway, they finally decided, because of my training in physics, that I could be a weather observer. So they sent me down to Daniel Field in Augusta, Georgia. And this was I got down there in March of 42. And they started me training to be a weather observer. And I found I was anxious to use my training as a landscape architect, so I asked them how I could get transferred to the Corps of Engineers. And they said, well, as an enlisted man, we can't transfer you, but if you want to apply for officer training, that's about the only way you can go. So I applied for that. And in April of 42, they sent me up to Fort Belvoir, Virginia, for OCS training. And that was one of the toughest 3 months of my life. The tactical officers were on your back every minute to make you do this and make you do that. And I finally made it through. They after I got my commission in July of '42, they decided with my college education and my experience with drafting that I ought to go to the enlisted specialist branch. So I was sent over there. I think I've got a picture of that. And so I was made a officer in that, and I hadn't been there very long, and they sent us down to Lexington, Kentucky.
If you hold that up in front of you, Wayne can...
And we were down there about 9 months. What they were training was specialists in topo computing, surveying, engineer drafting, and topographical drafting. And they had these 4 specialists. And I don't remember the numbers of students that they had per class. It says now 145 men every 2 weeks. And they eventually had 870 at one time. And so I was in charge of the engineer drafting. This was kind of a luxury assignment. We were given per diem. I think it was $6 a day in addition to your base pay. And I lived, the 2 officers there rented a nice house out on in the countryside there. And while I was there, this was horse country, Lexington, Kentucky. And we got to see Man of War. Man of War was still living then. It wasn't a big horse. He was a small horse compared with other race horses. And we got to, of course, on weekends go various places and see a lot of sights. Along about that time, let's see, that lasted from September of '42 until July of '43. And the Army pretty well filled up its quota or its necessity for these various specialists. So we were recalled and sent back to Fort Belvoir. And in the meantime, in July of '43, I got married. So I took my new bride back to Fort Belvoir and had to find a place to live. Finally, we found a place in Alexandria, and I commuted with some other officers back and forth to Fort Belvoir. And during this time, I continued with my duties as course supervisor. And in addition, they assigned me, I forget, it wasn't PR, it was, had to do with orientation and bringing the soldiers up to date on current events. So once a week I had to get up on the stage and give the guys an update on how the war was progressing. So that was one of my duties. Along about the end of '43, the word came down from the War Department that all those who hadn't been overseas had to go overseas, because the guys that were overseas had been over there 2 years and longer, and they wanted to give them a respite and let them come back home. So this one officer here, Larson, he had to go. The other 2, Whittemore and trying to think of his name now, Cooper, they didn't have to go. Larson had just had a a young son, and they tried to get him off, but said, no, you got to go. And of course, I didn't have any children. So anyway, the two of us were sent overseas. I went separately. I got my orders to go in April of 44. And initially, I was sent to Camp Shenango in Pennsylvania. And it's in southwestern Pennsylvania. And I was there, I got there in February, and there was an officer there who learned about my abilities, and he wanted me to help him with the improvements of the camp, the physical improvements, paths and roads and planning, beautification, stuff like that. But that came to naught because the Army had other ideas of what we should do. So anyway, my wife came down from Battle Creek, Michigan, visited me while I was there, and we made a trip up to Buffalo from there and back. Well, then in late March, they said, here's your orders for overseas. So they put a big contingent of us on a train in old passenger cars, no bunks or anything, and sent us down to Camp Patrick Henry in Virginia. That's near the Norfolk. And while we were down there, they issued us various pieces of equipment that we need overseas and on the way overseas. Finally, one day, the orders came out for us to go up to Philadelphia to Camp Kilmer, and I think there were 6 of us. So we all got on the train and went up to New York City. And since we didn't have to report till midnight, why, we spent some time sightseeing. Went up in the Empire Building and things of that sort. Finally, we reported to Camp Kilmer about 10 o'clock, 10 p.m. Boy, the guys that were in charge were angry with us. You guys were supposed to be here at so-and-so. Well, we brought out our orders. We were to report on such and such a date. And the custom is you have till midnight on that date to be there. Well, you missed your boat. It was down in Philadelphia. We was going to put you on a boat to take you overseas. So, what you going to do now? So they didn't discipline us or anything, but they let us know they were angry with us. They put us back on a train and sent us back down to Camp Patrick Henry. And they said, now we're going to get you on the boat you're supposed to be on. You're supposed to board it in Philadelphia. Well, they went down the river, went into the bay there near Norfolk, and it was in a big convoy. It was a 100-ship convoy, a great big convoy. And the day we were supposed to board the ship, I can't remember the exact date. I think it was 7th of April, something like that. They put us on a train, took us down to the wharf. We got off with all our paraphernalia, and they put us on a tug and took us out to a ship. Well, this is my first time to see a Liberty ship. And the name of it was the Sam Gaudie, Gaudie. It was a Lend-Lease ship to the British. It had a British crew, a British captain, and a British fare, food. they had a one stateroom for 5. They didn't have a place for me, so they put me up in a cabin where the gunnery officer would be stationed. And I guess I was the ranking officer of the group at the time. I was a first lieutenant by that time, and the others were all second lieutenants. So finally, the convoy lifted anchor and took off and headed east in the Atlantic Ocean. And as soon as we got on board, we asked the captain, "Where are we headed?" He said, "We're going to India." That was the first time we knew. None of the orders told us where we were going to go. And it was a carload primarily of rails and boxcars. They had additional other cargo pertaining to the war, but principally that's what the cargo was. And it was somewhat of an uneventful trip across the Atlantic. And as we approached Gibraltar, they were more concerned because the submarine packs were attacking these convoys, picking off a ship whenever they could. And the day after we passed through the Straits of Gibraltar, the guy says, "Where were you last night?" He said, "We had an attack and we were supposed to be up on the bow gun." They didn't have enough sailors to man the bow gun. It was what they call a 12-pounder. It's a 3-inch gun. And so 5 of us had been selected to man that gun. I was ammunition passer. And one of the fellows who had been in the Air Corps and had experience with machine guns, he was the gunner, and he could maneuver the gun onto the target. And we did have to set the fuse for whatever estimated elevation we thought the plane was at. So anyway, they had an attack as we went through Gibraltar, but we didn't lose any ships. So we got into the Mediterranean Sea, and I got to show you the map. We got, say, about a third of the way down the if I can find the map, a third of the way down the Mediterranean Sea, and we got into an attack one night. I was hoping I could find this map easy, but I don't think I can. Yeah, here it is. No, there it is. This map shows the route that we took. Which side? Yeah, here we are. I don't think the people watching the video can see because of the small detail, but anyway, trying to find the spot. This is called Bizerte, and that's in Algiers. It was late in the evening. We were each evening. Each evening we went out and manned the 3-inch gun for anti-aircraft. That was after we got in the Mediterranean Sea. And the Germans, you see, still occupied Africa at that time. And they could also fly in from Sardinia and Sicily and so forth. So we had to be very alert. I think this was the 17th of April, 1944. One of our officers that was his birthday, and we were going to celebrate his birthday that evening. And so the captain let us stay out on the bow until after the sun went down, because he said usually at sundown there was no more danger. Well, the Germans had a new tactic, or a different tactic. They waited until the sun went down, and they were on the coast of Africa, and they had us silhouetted in the last rays of the sun, and they came over this 82 ship convoy with skip bombs. There were two planes. We didn't see them. I was down in the head, the bathroom, getting ready to do some business there, and all of a sudden the ship jumped sideways with a big bang. The captain, who had lost 2 ships going to Malta, thought we were torpedoed or skip bombed, and he rung for stop engines. And then he ran out on the deck to see what had happened. Well, I knew something bad had happened. I thought we were torpedoed, and so I ran back up to my cabin to get my helmet. I couldn't find it, and so I finally ran on up to the gun to help defend ourselves. And as soon as the captain saw what had happened, he rang full ahead, and then they started their zigzag pattern. And you can imagine 82 ships in the dark having to zigzag and not run into one another. It was a difficult situation, and then they were putting down smoke too. What had happened, these 2 German planes had come over and skip bombed. They sunk 4 ships, and one of the ships that they hit was about a half a mile from us, and it was loaded with ammunition, plus all the Army personnel it had on it. Well, when that thing went off, that was the concussion that we had, and that's what made the captain think we'd been torpedoed. So anyway, here's this big column of smoke going up, and we lost, I don't know how many men. I've got I don't know whether I did have the, excuse me just a moment. I had this has got the story I never heard until, let's see, this is May of 2001, about what had happened at this time. And the Navy took pictures. If you want to hold up, yeah, here we are. This was that explosion. And
if you hold it in front of you, Wayne can get it.
This was that explosion that the Navy photographer took.
Okay, got it.
Okay. And then it has an article about it. I wrote an article back to that particular magazine telling about what happened, and nothing ever came from it. Anyway, it was a Dutch cruiser, I think, that went down, and in my recollection, there was over 1,000 men lost in that bombing accident. Well, needless to say, we went into the zigzag pattern, and nothing more of consequence happened between there and Alexandria. We did go by the island of Malta. I was telling you, our captain had, during World War II, when he was supposed to supply Malta with supplies, because they were under attack by the Germans. They never lost it, and it was difficult, of course, to keep them supplied with food and ammunition. And in trying to supply it, as I said, he had 2 cargo ships torpedoed or bombed. So he survived, and this was his 3rd ship. We finally came in sight of Alexandria and the Suez Canal, and we went down through the Suez Canal. I don't know whether you know it or not, but the Suez Canal has no locks in it. It's Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea are at the same elevation. It was quite strange. You'd be sailing along in this canal and look over here across the desert, and there's another ship in the desert coming your way, because the canal was not a straight line. Whenever 2 ships met in the canal, one of them had to pull over against the side and dock while the other one passed. We passed a lot of wreckage of ships that the Germans had sunk in the canal, and they had gotten them out of the way so they didn't obstruct the canal. That was a big job. We got down to the bitter seas, which are part of the canal system, and the bitter lakes, rather. And so the captain said to us, anybody wants to swim, we're going to pull up here for a while. We have to wait for other ships to come through. So we went down the gangway and swam in the bitter lakes. One thing that was interesting to me as a Christian was that as we went through the Red Sea, we had to go through the spot where the children of Israel crossed the Red Sea. They don't know where that point was, but we did have to pass through it. We got down to the south end. I can't think of the name of the town at the south end of the Suez Canal. But there we took on some fresh food and fruit and stuff like that, pineapples and I forget what other fruit. And I think we took on some fresh water too at that point. Going down through the Red Sea, you could see land on both sides. I just want to review my memory here a minute.
How long did it take the 82 ships to get through? Do
Oh,
you recall?
As soon as we got south of Sicily, the bulk of the ships went up there, and we were by ourselves from that point on. We were going individually because the war was going on big time up in Italy and Sicily at that time. So yeah, the bulk of it left us at that point. Let's see. I guess that's where the Apostle Paul visited too in his journeys when he was sent up to Rome. He stopped at Malta. Anyway, yeah. First there's the Gulf of Suez. You get in that, and that's about 100 miles long, and then that was on the 1st of May, according to my map here. And it took us from the 1st of May. Yeah, Suez was the name of the city at the south end of the canal. And from the 1st of May, 2nd of May, 3rd of May, 4th of May, 5th of May, we got down to Aden, you know, where the warship was recently torpedoed by the terrorist. We put into the bay there at Aden, and all the guys with their wares came out in their little boats to sell us stuff, but we weren't allowed to we spent the night there, weren't allowed to go ashore. And it was kind of warm at that time. I was surprised. In fact, the officers of the ship put on their whites, their shorts and everything. I was surprised at that. And as we were crossing the Arabian Sea, headed for Karachi, we saw this great big ship coming toward us. And it was coming like crazy and didn't have an escort. I guess it was the Queen Elizabeth or the Queen Mary. I forget which one it was. It was being used as a troop ship at the time. It had been into Bombay, I guess. But instead of going into, well, the reason we didn't go into Bombay was they'd had a tremendous explosion. An ammunition ship blew up in the harbor and just leveled everything. So they diverted us up to Karachi. And we got up to Karachi, let's see, we got up there on the 11th of May 1944. And it would have been much better to have gone into Bombay, but as I say, I didn't learn till later that they'd had this tremendous explosion. That's why we didn't go in there. We were sent, after we got off the ship, we were sent to a camp called Camp Malair, M-A-L-I-R, Malair. And it was a big airline too, airport. We spent a week there, and water was a big problem. It's all desert in that area. And so they saved all the wash water for irrigation. We went into Karachi one time. Couldn't do that today, you know, since it's in Pakistan. But at that time, it was, of course, part of India. And that was my first, we had a Sunday with, I think it was mangrove, a fruit that I was not used to. Anyway, that was quite a treat after the English diet all the way over from Norfolk. Well, as I say, we spent a week there, and finally they said, well, we're going to send you over to Calcutta. So we talked to the RTO, the Rail Transportation Officer, and he says, now, guys, he said, I'll give you a hint. He said, it's awfully hot on these Indian trains, and you go in compartments. They don't have an aisle down the center. In fact, you can't go from one compartment to another except in a station. So we were going to have a compartment for the 6 of us. And he said, rent a tub and put I don't know whether it was 50 or 100 pounds of ice in there, and then they have about 4 fans in there, and turn the fans on it, and that'll be your air conditioning. So the trip from Karachi up to Lahore, I think that was where we went next. Let me check that out. Yeah, we went up to Lahore. We got up there on the 19th of May. That was quite comfortable. The trip from Lahore down to Calcutta was a different story. We had an old coach, and they had a bunk on either side where a person could sleep. And I have to tell you about the toilet accommodations. We had a private toilet in this compartment, and it was about a cubby hole about 3 foot square, had a hole about this big in the floor, and there were 2 pads, so you were positioned correctly so you could hit the hole. And I think we had to have our own toilet paper. I learned later that the Indians, at least the common people, were so poor that they didn't use toilet paper. They always carried a little clay pot with them with water in it, and that was their toilet paper, what they cleaned themselves with. And they never offered you anything with their left hand. It was always with their right hand, because the left hand was the one they used to clean themselves with. So you never had anybody in India shake you with their left hand or give you anything with their left hand. That was the hottest, sweatiest journey I ever made in my life, and that lasted about 4 days from Lahore down to Calcutta. And we went through Lucknow, which used to be the capital of India. Delhi, as you know, is now the capital. And we finally got down to Calcutta on the 23rd of May. And they sent us out to a replacement depot on the Ganges River. Actually, it was a branch called the Hooghly River. And that camp was one of the worst camps I was ever in. We only had canned sea rations. I don't think the commanding officer had ever had any experience running a camp like that. I don't know how many hundreds of men and officers came into this camp, but they didn't have any flushing toilets. They had outside privies. In fact, the privy was so heavily used that while I was there, they had to clean it out. And I think what caused it to be cleaned out was somebody threw a match into it and from a cigarette, and the gases exploded. So they decided it was time to clean it out. It was a very interesting method of how they cleaned it out. They moved the building away, and all the stools that the person sat on, and the low caste Indian got in there with a kind of it wasn't a scoop, it was a dish of some kind, a big dish. He put that in a bucket and handed it up to the other guy on the edge, and he dumped it in the honey cart. Now they saved all the fecal matter because fertilizer is very difficult to come by, and that of course is what they fertilized their rice fields with. And of course the accompanying odors were quite overpowering. It was a difficult time too, because at that when we first got there, they were using native dishwashers, and of course the microbes that caused diarrhea were spread all through the food, and just about everybody got diarrhea. And when you've got diarrhea and have to stand in line to go to this toilet, it's quite an experience. I think that's the reason why they finally replaced the commanding officer of this camp. So many of us got sick. And during this time, this was in May of 1944, one of the big events in that theater, this was called the China, Burma, India Theater, CBI. It was known as Confusion Beyond Imagination. There was a great battle going on in Burma for a city of Michino. That's in North Burma. It was the railhead of the railroad that goes the entire length of the country. And the Japs had a large airfield there, and all our planes that were flying to China had to go way north over the higher mountains because of this threat from Michino. So General Stilwell decided that we had better eliminate this airfield, and so he sent, the British had been fighting further south in Burma, and he sent a group, the 5701st, I believe, group. They were known as Merrill's Marauders. Have you ever heard of Merrill's? Yeah, okay. He sent them in, and they were fighting during May while I was down at this Repel Depot, and that group, and they also sent in two battalions of engineers, the 109th, and I can't remember, the other was 20 something. There were two battalions pulled off the road. The road had started up in North Burma. They pulled them off the road and sent them down there to help Merrill's Marauders, because the Marauders got, beside being shot up, the disease was very rampant in that area. Diarrhea, amoebic dysentery. They had another fever, I forget what it's called.
Dengue fever?
No, it wasn't dengue fever. It was, I'll think of it after a while. But anyway, they were decimated. And so they were coming back to the Repel Depot to get replacements. And happily, 1331 is combat engineers. That's the MOS, military specialty for engineer officers. I happen to have, I think, a 1324, which is administrative officer. I was happy that so they didn't pick me, but they did pick a number of my buddies, and they went up to as replacements to these two engineer battalions. And in the meantime, I'm sitting there in this depot. What you gonna do? So I thought, well, we better get some recreation for the fellows, the enlisted men. So I went out around the country there to look around, and off to the west of the camp was a nice big pasture. So I went over there and scouted that, and there was a path went diagonally right through this pasture from the main road over to a little village. But I started walking across out in the field there, and everybody that had a call to nature had gone off the path a little ways and done their job. So I figured, no way can we use this field for baseball. So then too, I was able to visit a place called Chanagar. I didn't know the French had they had a territory right north of our camp on the river, and they administered it. It was like Goa. I don't know if you know, I've heard of Goa, which is on the western part of India. But this was independent territory of the French. And the Free French were still controlling this city. So that was one of the things I did. Then the base quartermaster in Calcutta arranged for a tour of all the field grade officers and above of the Calcutta facilities. And I was selected to guide the tour. I think I was given about 10 or 12 cargo trucks, and all were filled up with officers. And we went around to all the facilities, the King George docks, and the quartermaster slaughterhouses. This was an interesting thing. The Muslims, of course, can't touch pigs, but cows are not sacred to them. Hindus can touch pigs and slaughter them and dress them out, but they can't touch cows. So he hired the Hindus to slaughter the pigs and chickens, and the Muslims to slaughter and dress out the cows. And gathering those animals was very difficult in Bengal, the province of Bengal, because they're short of food too. He told me that this fellow in charge, the major, how they collected the chickens. And what they did was they'd give this guy so many rupees, put him on a train, he'd go out, way out in the country, get off the train, and he'd start walking back toward Calcutta, and as he went along, he'd buy chickens and put them on a pole, and when he got back to Calcutta, he'd turn them in, and that's how they got their chickens. We had chickens quite often. And as I told you, that's how it was difficult for them to buy cattle, because the Hindus wouldn't sell their cows. They were sacred, but they bought them from the Muslims. And at that time, the Muslims and the Hindus were all intermixed, and there was no problem. Well, I say no problem, just minor problems till Mahatma Gandhi was helping smooth things out. Mahatma Gandhi, at that time, when I was there, the British had put him in prison. Anyway, during this time, I talked to this major, told him that I had got a degree from an agricultural college, and could I help with their problems. He had a problem with food, with vegetables. And he said one of their problems was that the spoilage in the 300-mile trip from Siliguri, which was 300 miles north of Calcutta, down to the quartermaster depot, in these steel cars, they had a lot of spoilage of the green beans and things like that, particularly green beans. So he said, well, we haven't had anybody that we could spare to go up to Darjeeling where they raise these vegetables, so would you like to go up there? And I said, well, sure. I'm just marking time out here at the depot. Camp Angus was the name of the camp. And so he got orders for me to go up to Darjeeling. And as I was coming down through the Red Sea, the officers on the Sam Gaudi told me, said, if you ever get a chance, you got to go up to Darjeeling. That's a wonderful place. It's about 8,000 feet up in the mountains. So man, this was great for me, because to get out of this hot, humid, everybody got prickly heat, it's hot and steamy all the time. And so they cut orders for me to go up to Darjeeling. So I went up there, and the people in charge took me all around. They had about 5 different gardens where they grew these vegetables. You can't grow carrots and beans and cabbage and things like that down in the plains because it's too hot. They just won't grow there. So they grew them up at these in these gardens, and I got to go around. While I was up in Darjeeling, I went over to another city called Kalimpong, and that is you might say, the railhead, so to speak, of all the wool coming out of Tibet. And just about everybody that comes out of Tibet comes down through Kalimpong. I had a Jeep, and I drove from Darjeeling over to Kalimpong, and the grade is 3.5 to 1. Now, I don't know whether you know much about grades, but that is quite steep. You have to be in four-wheel drive and low range to negotiate that kind of road. I don't know how the civilian cars ever made it. But anyway, that was very interesting. Darjeeling sits on a hillside, a mountainside, I should say, and you can look up and see Mount Everest from there. And the other mountain that's so prominent, I didn't bring a picture of that, is Kinchinjunga. It is the third highest mountain in the world and about 800 feet short of Mount Everest. So it's a spectacular sight because you can sit on this mountainside and look almost from the valley the whole 28,000 feet that Mount Everest, Kinchinjunga is. It's snow covered, of course, year round. After that experience with I made a trip up there, and then they finally sent me back to stay there for a while. There wasn't a whole lot I could do. The British were very efficient, in my opinion, in growing and transporting the vegetables down to Siliguri and putting them in rail cars. The only thing that I thought that might be done would be a different container for the beans. They had a kind of a wicker basket about this big around at the top and that's tall, and they could stack that, but then there was no they were so flexible, there was no ventilation, and that was part of the problem. So I suggested maybe they could have a more rigid basket. So the guy in charge said, well, we've got this refugee camp over here in northeast Bengal. They make baskets. They're refugees, Indians that came out of Burma when the Japs came in. The Burmese turned against these Indians and killed a lot of them, and their only solution was to get back into India. Well, that was a real difficult proposition. So they sent me up to this camp. There must have been, I'd say 5,000 or 6,000 refugees in this camp, Indians who had been run out of Burma. And I explained the proposition to the head man. So I said, yeah, I said, we can make baskets for you guys. And they did. I think I've got a picture here of the basket making. And they made a series of baskets. That's not it. Oh, I don't know just where I'm at. Anyway, I don't want to take you. Oh, here it is. Here it is. They made a whole set of baskets. This was the refugee organization, and these are some of the baskets that they made for us. The upshot of it was that it was a two-way thing, wasn't a one-way thing, like a throwaway, and they couldn't afford to transport it back once they used it. So that project didn't pan out at all. After that, I went back, and they finally decided that No, they didn't decide they were going to put me aside. I got orders to report to Shillong, which is a resort area similar to Darjeeling. It's in the Khasi Hills. And so I was about to go up there, and I had a terrible case of athlete's foot. And the doctor was about to put me in the hospital, and I said, look, I said, I've been almost 11 months here trying to get an assignment, and here's a chance for me to get an assignment. So don't send me to the hospital. So he gave me some IBS. It was iodine and potassium permanganate and something else, all in a liquid. It's very purple, and you paint it on your toes, and it dried up the athlete's foot. So I got rid of the athlete's foot. But anyway, I'm trying to think how I got up I guess I went by train. I went by train from Calcutta up to Lido. And you get up to a place called Parbatipur, and the gauge of the train changes from broad gauge, which is about 5 feet, down to a meter, whatever the width of a meter is, 39 inches, something like that. So you have to change from one style coach to another style coach. And I finally got up to Lido and reported in, and the personnel officer says, after I'd been there about a day, says, we're going to assign you to the 330th Engineers. So they put me in a weapons carrier the next day and sent me by you know what a weapons carrier is, a 3/4 ton truck. They sent me up to the 330th Engineers, which was working on the road. I forget the mileage of where the camp was located, but right across from our camp was a Chinese camp of engineers. Now they're very pragmatic people. A fellow gets wounded and is not able to carry a gun, they send him back to the rear areas and put him to work. And these engineers that were across the creek or river from us were building wooden bridges for us. And our people cut the trees and so forth and drug them out to the edge of the road, and the Chinese with their trucks loaded them on, carried them down to the bridge site, and all with hand tools hewed out the timbers for these wooden bridges. We had to, at that time, boil all our water. I remember this distinctly. They made me mess officer, and we ran the water through our purification system, adding chlorine, and the filter got all the solid matter out of it. Then we put it in a GI can and boiled it. And after we boiled it, we put it in some more GI cans, let it cool down. Then after it cooled down, we put it in the Lister bag and added the chlorine tablets. So we had 5 parts per million of chlorine in the water. And this Lister bag, of course, was suspended there in the shade. And as the water oozed through the fabric, why, it had a somewhat cooling effect. But generally, the water was air temperature, and you can imagine at least 80 or 90 degrees, plus 5 parts per million chlorine, and that was the water we had to drink.
George, I'm going to stop you here. We're going to change tapes.
That's okay.
Okay.
Okay, I got to tell about the laundry part. we didn't have any laundry facilities, and we're always sweating and dusty, all the dust all the time. So your clothes got dirty and dusty, and about all we could do, the individual soldier had to wash his own clothes, but the officers hired one of the enlisted men to wash their clothes. And it was, finally we got to a point in I guess in December of '44, when the quartermaster would take our clothes and they had a laundry. But when it came back, you didn't necessarily get the same clothes back you said. You just had to pick out something that would fit. But even that was great to have clean clothes to wear. Also, we had a lot of sea rations, canned goods, stew and hash and powdered milk, and we were getting Indian coffee. That was terrible stuff. About the only way you could drink it was when it was so hot you couldn't hardly stand it. When it got cool, it was bitter, and it was long in '45 before we began to get American coffee. Of course, that came from South America. But we were down where the peacocks were. Peacocks were native to that area, and elephants were there, wild elephants, and tigers. Bengal tigers were very common in that area. We see their footprints in the sand. I don't think in fact, I never saw a live one. They're very skittish. Talking about tigers, I got to tell about one of our enlisted men when we were stationed at mile 273. We had to send a contingent of truck drivers to haul goods, engineer materials. And while he was in this camp, I thought it was halfway up to Lido in Burma, but later some of the stories I've read in, like this magazine I was showing you, they said it occurred in Lido area. One of my men was in a basha with two other truck drivers, and this tiger came into the basha, and he struck the guy in his jungle hammock and knocked him out of the hammock, and it ripped his thigh open here with his claw. And the others jumped up and hollered and scared this tiger. It was an old tiger. I forget what they call him, not a rogue, but one that is so old he can't catch live game anymore. So he has to catch humans, which are easy to catch. Well, anyway, they ran the tiger off, and one of the sergeant shot it with a Tommy gun, killed it. But the poor boy got infection in that leg, and he never came back to camp. They had to send him back home. Those tigers, you know, in digging out carrion and stuff like that, had all kinds of infection in his claws.
When you were with the 330th Engineers, what were your primary missions? What were your...
We were road building. We were building a road from Lido all the way to Canal. That was our mission. And I don't know how many engineer units. There were a lot of engineer units involved in this project, building this road. It was from Lido over the mountains. They had to go up over two ridges up to 4,000 feet, and down through the Hukong Valley, down to Michinov to Bamo, and then from Bamo on over into China. And
Is that what they referred to as the Lido Road?
yeah, that was the Lido Road. It was later named the Stillwell Road, but I always think of it as the Lido Road. And some units were involved in bridge building using Bailey Bridge, and on the bigger rivers they had to use Bailey Bridge. On the smaller streams, we built fixed wooden bridges, H-20 bridges. I don't know if you are acquainted with that term, but that means a 20-ton, it'll take a 20-ton load. And we built a number of wooden bridges.
Did you stay with this Chinese unit most of that time?
No, they were used, we had 3 sizes of culverts, and of course drainage was a very important factor in building this road, because we had 200 inches of rain a year, and most of that came in a 5 months period, like from April until September. And they put in these culverts were 6 foot and 3 foot, and they came in halves and they were bolted together. So that was a manual labor job, and the Chinese did most of this. We would be given a 20-mile stretch of road to build. They had a combat trace that they made with a bulldozer that allowed us to get down there with our trucks and our equipment. And then we cleared the right-of-way about 100 feet either side the center line, and we would had scrapers that would hold 8 yards. They were tractor-drawn scrapers. We finally got some Laternos, and they held 12 yards. You know, they had more motorized. You've seen them. And man, they could get up and go 15 miles an hour, whereas the tractor only maybe 5 miles an hour clacking along the road. So when we got those Laterno earth movers, man, we could move earth like crazy. And most of it's clay. I'd say all of it was clay. And there was enormous trees that we had to cut down, and some of them we dynamited. It was to get the roots out of the ground. Because if you cut it off, then you had a deuce of a time getting the stump out. It was easier to load it up with dynamite and blow it out. This was the first time in my experience that I ever saw a chainsaw. We had, they were 2-man chainsaws, weren't single-man chainsaws like they have today. But that was the first time in '44 that I ever saw a chainsaw. And they weren't too reliable. It was hard to keep them running. Anyway, earth moving was the big thing that we did in Company B of the 330th Engineers. There were 6 companies and a headquarters and service company in this regiment. And they were one of the primary builders of the Lido Road, the 330th Engineers. We moved from the first camp I was sent to. This unit had been there since '43, I believe. And they had had experience in Churchill, Manitoba, I think, before they came to the CBI. Anyway, we moved down to Nam T, and they had a bakery down there, so we got bread. And while I was down there, I got some souvenirs. I think I got an item here. I have to dig it out. I don't know what I did with it. I had in the railroad yeah, here it is. This is a souvenir I got out of one of the railroads.
Is that made out of tin?
It's a piece of tin, and the thing that I was interested in, the public are requested to report to the district traffic superintendent or to the traffic manager any case of incivility on the part of the railway staff. I was quite interested in that. Let's see, what happened at NAMT? I was still mess officer there, and the natives came to our dump. We dug out a hole with a bulldozer, and anything that we didn't want, we dumped in there. But all of our tin cans and stuff, the natives came and salvaged all those because they didn't have anything. But in regard to the railroad, when we got to NAMT, I was discouraged that we didn't have any place to wash. At the first camp, we just got in the river and washed, and it was November, December. It gets cold in northern Burma. It doesn't freeze, but it's cold. In fact, at NAMT, we had little pot-belly stoves in our tents to keep warm. But losing my train of thought here. What happened at NAMT? Oh, I decided that we should have a shower for the men. So I went to these railroad cars. They had pipes in them, and all kinds of pipes. And one of our guys was a plumber, so I took him along with me, and we got enough pipes to make a coil. And the problem was, how do you make a coil out of straight pipe? We got a stump that had a small tree beside it, and we put one end of the pipe in there, and we twisted it around the stump. Then we got the welders to weld this coil into a 50-gallon drum, and we could thread one end of it, in fact both ends of it, and we got a burner that would burn gasoline, and that gave us the fuel to heat it. And we had another tank that held the hot water, and so we built some wooden pieces, I forget what you call them, to stand on while you showered. We went down to a company that did mechanical work and lathe work, and he rigged us up some shower heads and some valves out of beer cans, punched holes with nails in the, so man, when the guys could take a shower, they were so happy. As I told you, it was always dusty on the road in the dry season because it's dry in the wintertime, and always dusty. So when they could get in there and wash that dust off and dirt and sweat, they were happy. So that was one accomplishment that we made at NAMT, and we carried that with us all the way down to our next camp. And by that time, of course, the Battle of Michinal, that had ended on the 2nd of August, 1944. And the name of the major that I got acquainted with in Calcutta, his was M.C. Coop, C-O-O-P. He was a Texan, a real fine fellow. And he brought, when the Battle of Michinal was over, he came up with a plane load of fried chicken and ice cream to the survivors of the battle. And those guys were sure appreciative of that. Anyway, getting back to NAMT, finally we completed the 20-mile stretch of road that we were supposed to build. And it was an all-weather road. the road was 20 foot wide and had 1 foot of gravel on it. And we got the gravel out of the rivers that were nearby. So that's how we got the gravel. And we just used bank rut gravel, and it had a lot of boulders in it, and it made it rough going down the road. Finally, what they did, by their grading process, they got all these big rocks off to the side, and then they brought portable rock crushers that were pulled by a truck. They weren't very big, but the guys took a shovel and shoveled them up into this gas-powered thing, and that gave us crushed rock to throw back on the road. In the dry season, it was dusty as could be, but in the wet season, when it was raining, that was one of the best roads you ever saw, because the water, of course, held all the fines together, and we graded the section that we had built. We ran 2 graders out 10 miles one way in the morning, and they came back and ate lunch, and then dinner is what we call it, and went the 10 miles the other way. We always kept roads up in fine shape. The next camp was at mile 273 south of Michino, and we had to cross the Irrawaddy River. The Irrawaddy River is, I would liken it to the Tennessee River. I don't know if you've ever been on the Tennessee River, but it's like that, and it comes off of glaciers. The little feeder creeks were nice and warm. We could swim in them, but you get in the Irrawaddy and it was icy cold. But it had so much fungi in it that the regimental surgeon prohibited us from swimming in it anymore, because the guys got so much fungus in their ears. I went fishing on a number of times with cratering charges and so forth. I won't dig out the pictures, but I got the pictures here in this showing some of the fish we caught in the Irrawaddy River. And
Now, could you eat those fish?
yes, oh yes, yeah. Oh, and I got to tell you, at mile 273, we had a tremendous fishing experience. There is a river comes in there south of Michino called the Nam Tibet, N-A-M-T-A-B-E-T, Nam Tibet. It's a big river. We knew there were fish in it, so I'm going to save 30 minutes for Korea.
Yep.
I got the guys that were interested in fishing together and said, hey guys, let's go fishing. So we took 2 blocks of TNT, and he put a fuse, a non-electric cap in it, and a short fuse about this long. One guy that smoked cigarettes was going to set them off. The rest of us stripped off in our skinnies, and with each had a sandbag to put the fish in. And we went down to this place where it was rocky, and the water was deep. So the guy had 2 different lengths of fuses, and he lit them, tossed them in, and of course they almost went off simultaneously and boiled all the big fish. It was a fish about that long with great big scales. They were bigger than my thumbnails. The scales were, I'd never seen such big scales. And the rest of us jumped in with our sandbags. Of course, the water was over our head, and we're treading water there trying to put these slick fish into the sandbag. And had we just used our head and gone down the river about 50 yards, the water got shallow where we could have stood there and just, as a fish come along, put them in the bag. But here we're trying to keep our head above water and put these slick fish in the bag. We must have had at least 14 sandbags, and we never caught all the fish that we killed, stunned. But I took at least seven bags back to camp, and it was so heavy, we knew we couldn't carry them, so one guy went back to camp and got the Jeep and brought it down. We put them in there. Well, we got back to camp about 11 o'clock, and the mess sergeant says, hey, says, I'm not going to clean those fish or have my guys clean them. He says, if you guys want them cleaned, you got to clean them yourself. Well, at that time, I had no skill at all in cleaning fish. The only way I knew was to scale them. And so we said, well, all right, we'll eat lunch, and after lunch we'll clean the fish and have the fish for supper. So that's what we did. And there was more fish there than the company of 200 men could eat. And what was left, we threw over in the dump. Well, the next morning, as I was walking there, here was this native out there. He picked up these fish that we'd thrown in there the day before. And you know, in a hot climate like that, it had to be starting to spoil. But what made me feel bad about it was all the fish that we killed, these native people, of course, had I don't know how they caught them, how they caught them, but I went back and tried that hole again. There wasn't a single fish in it. And I say, I felt bad. I'd taken the food away from these people that had a steady supply of fish. Well, that was the fishing expedition. At that time, this was got to be in '45 in March. Many convoys were coming by, going to Kunming. 50 to 100 trucks at a time, carrying all kinds of things, weapons, machine guns, cannons, explosives, food, whatever. Plus the trucks, once they got there, were turned over to the Chinese. So they had completed this road in January of '45. I've got a picture of the first convoy that went to Kunming. I stood beside the road with my little camera and took a picture. From there, in April of '45, the road had been completed, so they sent Company B up to Michinal. Now, Michinal, did I show you where it's located?
No.
It's right there. It's the railhead of the railroad that goes from Rangoon north. It goes through Mandalay and all the other big cities in Burma. And I've got to tell you about the lumbering. Our camp was located on a riverbank south of Michinal, in the edge of Michinal, in a teakwood forest. The teakwood at that time was not, the trees were not very big. They weren't ready for harvest. They wait till they got to about this big or even this big before they harvest them. There was a lot of teakwood in central and north Burma. And one of the fellows that I got acquainted with at the U.S. Typhus Commission was a fellow named Jack Gershom. He was known as Burma Jack. He had been recruited by the OSS to fight the let's see if I can find his book here. No, this is the Burma Surgeon. I'll tell you about him too. Anyway, Burma Jack was a buyer for the Burma Teakwood Company of Bombay, and in order to harvest this wood, they have to girdle the tree a year ahead of time and kill it. And then after it sits there a year and dries, they go in, cut it down, and cut it up in logs, and the water oxen snake it out to the edge of a stream, and then they stack it. The elephants stack it in big piles, and they stack it in such a manner that when the rains come in the spring, they can pull out a key thing, and the whole thing will roll into the stream when the stream's high enough to float down the river. That's the process by which they do it, and they put a special mark on each log so that they know who to give credit to, whose log it was. And it's floated down the Irrawaddy River to Mandalay, and then they have a big boom across the river there, and that collects the logs, and then they saw it up, and after saw it up, they ship it out of the country or wherever it's used. Teak wood is very dense and hard wood, and many of the ships in that area, in the Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea and so forth, the native ships are all made of teak wood because they don't rot. And many of the decks of modern ships today have teak wood decks, and the frames of the more modern homes in Burma are made from teak wood because the termites don't eat it. I'll give you a sample you can take with you. When I was going to come home, I had a quartermaster officer in charge of the regiment, or battalion, the battalion. And he came up to my company, and I was telling him about the teak wood I had. And for some favor that I had done for somebody there in the lumber yard, he gave me enough teak wood as big as this sofa is right here, in 8-foot lengths, this wide, 3/4 is dressed. And I told this officer, I said, if you'll ship that home for me, I'll give you half of it. So he said, that's a deal. I said, I want the Burmese bell. I've got a Burmese Buddhist bell with all kinds of inscription on it. It was left over from the fighting in Menchino. I said, that includes the bell too. So he shipped it home for me. After I got discharged, why, here came this shipment sometime. It must have weighed 400 pounds. It was my intention to make some furniture and stuff out of it, but I was so poor after I got out that I never had enough money to have the furniture made. So I still have pieces of the teak wood left. But anyway, when I went back in '97 to Menchino, I was surprised. The jungles was gone. They'd cut down all the wood, been decimated. At that time, there was only local ferries to get across the Irrawaddy, and in '97, the Burmese government was building a big bridge to cross the river so they could trade with the Chinese. Well, anyway, while I was there in Menchino, we built a coke plant, and the guy that was in charge ran off about six crates of bottled coke, and that was the end of the run, because the war in Japan was over. This was the 2nd of September declared over in '45. So they were going to dismantle it, ship it back to or down to Rangoon and over to Japan. So he and I decided we'd go on a trip, and we took several extra GI cans of gasoline with us, and we wanted to go up to Superbomb, which is way north. And so we did. That was quite a trip. We had to cross 4 different streams, and the natives, I guess the British at that time, had set up these ferries, and they were made of, the first 3 were made of gasoline drums, big enough to get the jeep on the ferry, and then they pulled it across by hand. I don't know whether I've got a picture of the probably can find one. You've heard about the road to Mandalay?
Mm-hmm.
There is a marker showing how to get to Mandalay. This picture here was a baptism that I took in '97 when I was there in Michigan. What was that? Trying to find you a ferry.
Ferry, yes.
See if I can find. Oh. This is a picture of Burma Jack. Jack Gershom. I corresponded with him.
No, which one is he?
Where is he?
Where is he? Which picture is it?
This is Burma
This
Jack.
one, okay.
This is Burma Jack. These were added Venice boys that I knew were in my company. He was the OSS agent. He was sent out to assassinate collaborators with the Japanese. And they had a bounty on Jack. The Japanese did. I forget how many rupees plus a sack of salt for capturing him.
You know whatever happened to him? I mean,
Yes.
obviously he survived the war.
He survived the war. For a while, he was animal control officer in the province of Assam, and his job was to go out and kill the rogue elephants. And because the natives had taken away so much jungle from the elephants, the elephants had to have something to eat, and they'd come in and tear up the crops of the natives. So he used an 8-gauge shotgun to kill these rogue elephants. And he sent me a Christmas card one time and was telling me about this one elephant. He was out to kill it, and the elephant was charging him, and he shot it at him and missed it. And the elephant was still coming at him, so it was a double barrel. So he stepped behind the tree, the elephant went, and while the elephant was turning around to come back again, he shot him. He said, don't try to shoot him with a .30-06 or anything like that. He said, it won't stop him. You got to use an 8-gauge single slug to kill them, to penetrate their skin. And that was his job. But because he was part British, he lost his job and retired with his second wife to London. And he finally died there. I got a picture of him shortly before he died. Yeah, I made a trip to Kunming too, in a C-46.
Now, when you went back in '97, were there any remains left of any of the camps you were in, or?
No, I missed a good opportunity there. Yeah, here's one of the ferries that we were crossing on that trip to Superbomb up in northern Burma. And Jack Gershom, in some of the talks that we had said, George said, let's go after the war, let's go hunting up there. But we were never able to do it. I'm going to have to cut short this.
Well, when did you eventually go home to the States?
I went home in December of 1945, and I left India December 31st, 1945, from Karachi. We flew from Chabwa to Karachi, and the guy went around the Taj Mahal so we could looking
Yeah.
at Taj Mahal. And I left there and got back in February to Seattle and back to Chicago and got discharged.
What was your final rank?
I was one of the longest term first lieutenants you ever did see. Because of my being different places and different assignments, I missed out. And when I got discharged because of my efficiency record, they promoted me 1 grade. So I got out as a captain. And then in 1950, I was still in the reserve. I'd signed up for reserve. I figured, well, man, it won't hurt to have a nice pension, you know. So I was going to stay in the reserve, and in 1950, you know, in June, the North Koreans came down. And so Truman decided we're going to defend the South Koreans, and so he sent our people over there to fight the North Koreans. And of course we began to get beat up badly, and we had to call up the reserves. There weren't enough regular army to stem the tide. So about that time, this was in October of 1950, I had signed up to take an advanced course at Fort Belvoir because I wanted to up my ability to be promoted and so forth and get more training. So I had orders to go to Fort Belvoir for this 3 months course, and at that time I was in a gardening enterprise with my stepfather in North Alabama. And so I was winding up my affairs to go to Fort Belvoir, and then I get by mail a set of orders rescinding my orders to go to Fort Belvoir and ordering me to Fort Bragg to the 20th Engineers. Man, I hit the ceiling. I had been in the inactive reserve, which meant that they couldn't touch me, call me to active duty. Well, in order to go, they had to put me on the active reserve. So that's how they did it. So I got in the car and went down to Decatur, Alabama to talk to the reserve officer in charge down there. Man, I was boiling. And he looked at this and he says, well, George, he said, there were 6 other guys ahead of you that were called, and they got their congressman to get off. Can you get your congressman to get you off? I said, gee, I don't know anybody, and why should I do that? He said, well, that's the only way you're going to get off. So I decided, well, okay, I'll take my lumps. And so in November of 50, I reported to Fort Bragg, to the 20th Engineers, and was made headquarters and service company commander. And we went through 2 training cycles there with draftees and retreads. And then in September of 51, I got orders to go to Korea. So I had to send my wife back to Battle Creek, Michigan, where I had a home. And I reported out to Camp Stoneman, and this was in October. They put me on a ship and sent me over to Japan, and I got over there to Tokyo to one of the camp there. And the orders came through for me to be, I forget what the term is, courier. I was to be a courier to go to Daegu. I thought, man, this is going to be great, because I'd heard all the stories about how we got the pants shot off us in Korea and frozen and everything like that. So I thought, gee, this is going to be great. Well, all the courier was just carried the orders for all the shipment of the other guys, because they went by boat, and I got to fly over to Daegu, and that was the headquarters of the Army at the time. And so when I got there, I got an assignment to the Korean Military Advisory Group, KMAG. And finally, they sent me to down to Busan to be a post engineer of KMAG Rear. And I was there for a while, and then one day they sent me down orders, said, we're going to send you over to Koji Island. They've got, I don't know, 45,000 PWs over there in compounds. And so I went over there and relieved the guy that I was replacing, and I was made advisor to the 202nd Engineer Construction Battalion. Well, I had to go back up to Daegu to sign for the Jeep and other property that this guy had. But while I was there, tomorrow's the 7th of May, 50 years ago, on the 7th of May, the PWs captured the American general of the camp. Can you imagine? That was really when the stuff hit the fan. It made us look terrible. And of course, the reason that happened, we ran such a sloppy operation that it could happen. The way it happened was the general went down to this compound 76 to listen to some complaints that the people had, the honchos in the camp. And while the General Dodd and his MP Lieutenant Colonel were standing there at the gate, the detail that carried out the honey bucket detail, these were half drums. They'd just been down to the wharf and dumped the contents in the bay, and had come back. But they had timed it, the PWs had timed this, so that while Dodd and this Lieutenant Colonel were standing there by the gate, they surrounded them bodily, and there were two GIs with M1s on either side that could have shot them, and the general told them not to shoot, because if they'd have, with their M1s and their extra ammunition, they could have shot everybody that was there. And I guess Dodd was afraid he was going to get hit in the firefight, because all they had was the clubs that the cross pieces they carried the honey buckets with. That's all they had. And the PWs carried him on into the compound. It took them 7 days to negotiate his release. And at that time, this flap took precedent over any other stuff in the newspapers in the United States. They replaced Dodd with a fellow called Colson, and he negotiated the release. And finally, because of the concessions that Colson made, they replaced him with a fellow named Hayden Boatner, who had been General Stilwell's second in command. But this was some of the fighting that took place, some of the things that happened, and afterward, it took them about 30 days to decide exactly what they were going to do and put their plan into action. The PWs were flying their own flag. This is we call it the Texaco flag. It's the North Korean flag. They were flying their own flag and doing their own thing. Our people didn't even dare go into these compounds. The PWs controlled what went on in the compounds. Well, finally, the day came that they were going to settle this issue with the PWs. They broke up Compound 76, and they had new compounds built. The unit that I was with, the 202nd ROCA engineers, had a great deal to do with building the new compounds. And the new compounds held only a maximum of 500 PWs. And the other compounds held 6,000 and 7,000. And they say the U.S. military didn't have control inside, period. The PWs made up frails of barbed wire. They were about this long, and they wrapped cloth around the handle so they could use that as a weapon. And they also made spears. The U.S. was very generous to the in trying to teach them what to do and give them a trade or something. I was looking to see if I didn't have a picture of the yeah, here. This was out of Life magazine, and this is one of the spears. They cut that out of a gasoline drum, put it on a stick, and wrapped it with cloth. And this shows one of these spears. In fact, the communists killed, I think, 11 of the people who were against them. And they found the bodies in Compound 76 when they went in there to clear it out. But they broke them down, and all the compounds in that area they put into new compounds, and they marched them down the road in say 50 in a group. They had them strip off all their clothes, and they went in bare naked into the new compound and issued them clothes in there. So that's how they did it. And I was, I say, advisor to this group for until I let's see, I'm trying to think. Yeah, we moved over to the mainland over in Pusan in August, and I was sent up to the front lines shortly thereafter, up near the main line of resistance of the MLR, and that's where I met this Chuck Wade. He was my commanding officer, and I was advisor to the, I can't remember the unit I was advisor to, but we were up there where the you could see the flash of the big guns at night, where they were shelling the Chinese. And I was there until December of 1952, and they gave me a choice of signing up indefinitely, and so I said, well, I'm not going to sign up indefinitely. So they said, well, we're going to send you home. So they sent me home, and I got home in February of '53, and that was kind of the end of the story. I have one little side story I'd like to tell about
Sure.
it. Let's see. While I was on Koji Island, there was a fellow there by the name of one of the interpreters that I had, and he, let's see if I can find a picture of it. Oh, this is Mr. Chang, and this was his sister. Now you know the story of Joseph and Mary.
Yes, if you hold it up.
Who went down to Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
He claimed Joseph claimed that this Mary was his sister, so the Egyptians wouldn't kill him.
Right.
And so
Okay.
he claimed that this woman here was his sister.
Uh-huh.
Well, as it turned out, it was his wife. What happened was, when he was evacuated from Hungnam, he's a North Korean. When he was evacuated from Hungnam, he was a college student. He speaks 5 languages. And he got on this boat, and this woman's husband went back to get something else, and while he was gone, the ship LST took off, and they didn't know what happened to him. And he was dumped with all the other refugees down on Koji Island. So this woman had two young children, 2 daughters. And he looked after them, and they all lived in the same dwelling together. Mm-hmm. And I went down to their dwelling one time and saw it. It had a dirt floor and everything, and times were hard for them. Well, later, when he was up in Seoul, the husband showed up, but he wouldn't take his wife back. Because she'd been living with this guy. So eventually he married this woman, or as they were common law wife. But then he wanted to come to this country, and I got him a scholarship at a horticultural college in West Chicago, and he went there. This was way back when. These are her 2 daughters, and then they had 2 sons together. And this guy was her husband. He showed up in Seoul, but wouldn't take her back. So Chang unofficially married her. Well, then, while I was in Lombard, Illinois, he wanted to come to this country, and I got him a scholarship at this school. And he came over and brought his wife. It turned out that was his sister. Or it wasn't his sister at the time. So he said, well, I'd like to get a Christian marriage. So asked me to arrange a marriage for him. Mm-hmm. So I went to one of the Lions Club members who was a minister. And I told him the story of this guy. And he says, well, he said, yes, I'll perform the marriage. So you can see, we had a nice marriage for him. And in fact, he just called me by telephone last night. I had a conversation.
Now, where does he live?
He lives in Chicago. And he's had quite a varied career. He's quite a politician himself. And yeah, he was the prime student that they had, and they hired him after he got through. He worked there 2 years, and then he decided he'd go in business for himself, and he had an import business in Chicago. And there he is with Adlai Stevenson. So anyway, he had this import business, and he finally sold that and started a restaurant in Division Street, I believe it was. And the restaurant did quite well for a while, and eventually so many Koreans and Filipinos, and I forget what other Taiwanese. Yeah, I got you.
No, I'm just saying we're running on. We got 5 minutes.
Yeah.
On the film.
Anyway, he had this beautiful restaurant. I went there several times to visit him, and then he had a laundromat too, in conjunction with. But finally, when he retired, he's 10 years younger than I. He's 75 now, and he finally sold that. But when I was living in about a $40,000 home, he had a $75,000 home in the western suburbs, so he did quite well. And as I say, he spoke 5 languages: English, Korean, of course, Japanese, French, and German. He was quite a well-educated fellow. He was a pre-med student when the North Koreans invaded, and he had to leave. He was a Christian, so he knew he didn't dare stay there. So he's living there, and his son, the one son that's done well, Douglas, was a top student. He went to the schools there in Lombard. I don't know whether he was valedictorian or not, but he was did so well academically that he got a scholarship, and he got a degree as a medical doctor, and finally worked up to be in charge of hospitals, a number of different hospitals in the Chicago suburbs. So.
Do you ever stay in contact with anyone else from your time in the service besides
Yes.
him?
Yeah. One of the corporals. I was trying to rent a house one time in Lombard, and a state policeman was looking at the house the same time I was, and I asked him, did he know this particular fellow? And I named him. Oh yeah, I know him. And I said, well, can I have his address? So one time when I had a conference down in St. Louis, I stopped by to see him. And another time, the commanding officer that I had while I was at miles 273, I can't think of his first name, Bob. Anyway, he came to see me 2 different times, and finally he died here about 2 years ago. And a number of fellows, the commanding officer that was in command of Company B when I first got into Burma, he lived over here in a city in New York State, and I went over to see him, and he had died 2 years before.
Yeah.
That's the way it happens. And just yesterday, I got this picture in the mail from this woman. Here's the picture. It's about 7 guys on a boom truck. I don't remember the guys at all, but I remember the boom truck.
Are you in that picture at all?
No, I'm not in that picture at all. And her name and address is here. She looked after this fella, Arthur Lewis. He was a sergeant in charge of construction, and she said in the letter that she looked after him for 14 years after he retired and went from Massachusetts to Florida. So I have these things happen all the time.
That's great. Okay, well, thank you very much for your interview.
Well, it's been a pleasure.